What's up everybody, welcome back to Make It Kustom. I'm Carl Fisher. Today I've got a video on MIG welding versus TIG welding. I think there's a lot of information we can cover there, kind of comparing the two. And I just want to show you guys where I like to use TIG welding versus MIG welding. And I've got a great example that's about to happen when we're working on this Model A. So I've got these panels that I'd like to install that we made in the last video. We pressed these out to finish the bead on the hood. And I've also got a bead that I would like to delete from the cowl and fill a cowl light hole and extend this body line. So I'm going to show you guys a little bit of MIG welding versus TIG welding in this video on the Model A. So don't forget to like, hit subscribe, hit notifications if you haven't yet. Let's get into the video. All right, so I've already got these pieces made, so I'm gonna go ahead and make the pieces for this, and we're gonna I'm thinking right now that I might do these both at the same time. I might work on this and this at the same time so that we're fitting both pieces at the same time, we're welding both pieces at the same time, just to I don't know if that's gonna help, but that's what I'm thinking. So I'm gonna go ahead and make a bit of a template of this area, and I'm going to cut out a piece of metal so that we can weld it in with MIG on the cowl, and we're going to use TIG on the hood. All right, so what I ended up doing is modifying another set of dies that I had. These were step dies. They had just a little bit of a notch on them, and I never once used that exact step. It was just this tiny little step. And what I always used it for was just tipping. So I was always riding on this edge of the wheel and this back edge, so the depth of that really doesn't matter when you're trying to just tip a shape like this. You can have any depth you want, so you just kind of keep cranking it down and passing it through until it's the step depth that you want. I'm not sure if you can see how the metal sort of slips itself further and further down. Anyway, this is my test panel for this piece here. I want to talk about just for a second why I'm choosing to do this. And one way that you could attack this problem, I'm just going to go a little wider view here, is that you could cut right on this edge and cut on the other side of this bead and put a strip in there. Now, the problem with that is that now you have two welds that are side by side creating a lot of heat. It's very hard to control distortion of that. So we're not going to do that. Instead, I want to move the weld in here in a little bit lesser important area. It's not outer body metal. There's a lot of spot welds in here, and on the other side, it's actually looking a little rough. So now that we're deciding to go in here as our weld line, we might as well smooth the whole thing out. That's kind of what I'm thinking, because the other side doesn't look as good as this one. So I'm going to end up putting the weld right next to this bead by a little bit, and that's where we'll shave it. When you're welding things together, especially with MIG, for MIG mostly, it's nice to be close to beads or brakes because that is a little bit stronger of an area. So this is our fence depth here, and I've got it just a little bit 1/4 inch shy away from there. And once that bead is taken care of, this is going to sit nice and flat in there. So I'm going to replace that whole edge. Some of our rust and pitting is kind of made this edge a little wonky. Where I put this patch in, it's a little bit different down here. This is going to make the whole thing consistent. So I'm going to actually put a piece in that goes right from the top all the way to the bottom, deletes this whole bead, and then I'll probably just bring it out like that to delete the hole. As close to this broken edge as possible when we're welding, the stronger it will be and the less distortion will be able to happen when it's right next to a break like this. That's something that you got to think about to your advantage, right? Take what you can get. So it'll be stronger if the weld is closer to here. That means that this flange, we don't want it to be too wide. So we'll probably hang, a 1/4 inch away from the edge of this bead and then just have a little piece of it that goes and fills that hole. But yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to run the two pieces through now. The real ones, this was just a tester, so I've got a couple of pieces right here. I'm going to run those through on the fence, and that'll be our left side and our right side. I got the step in it with the bead roller. I left a little tab here to fill this cowl light hole. Right now, this is dead straight, so I'm gonna have to put some curve into it, not only this way, but this way. And I think that this is a shallow enough curve that we can just sort of manipulate it and press on it. But this curve here that is doing that, I'm gonna have to use the shrinker stretcher. So rather than stretching this flange to get this curve, I think I'm gonna choose to stretch, or sorry, not stretch, but shrink this flange. The reason I'm thinking about that is because I would rather have my marks from shrinking here rather than here. That's just my thought process. So what I'm gonna do is, I'm really happy with the step actually. This edge here is so much nicer than this edge. It's gonna look really good. So I'm gonna start to just shrink this flange so that we can get the curve in here, and then just manipulate it to fit as good as I can on both sides. All right, so I got this piece cut in here. I wanted to talk a little bit about how to mark that out and cut that out. This way, I used a Sharpie line all the way around. I tried to position this so that it was directly on top of the metal. You kind of have to think about when you're butt welding something and lining up a patch. When you overlap the piece, is it sitting one way or another? Like, is that line actually going to be true? So when I line up my piece, I'll show you on this side, I want to make sure that it is right on top of the metal. Like, even if I have to pull it to the side a little bit, so that when the metal drops straight in, then this body line lines up, right? That's how I want to mark it. So with MIG welding, the rule of thumb is that I always want the patch to be in there as tight as possible and as consistently as possible. But you know, with MIG welding, it doesn't matter quite as much. Like, you can have a little bit of a gap here and there and it's going to fill easily. But like I said, consistency is key. This method is not quite as accurate as the scribing method, but I still use it a lot because it's really easy and it is accurate enough. So I try and keep my zip cut blade right on the edge of the Sharpie line, so I'm leaving the Sharpie line on there. I find it really easy to see when the edge of your blade is on the edge of a Sharpie line. So that's what that method is. Just super easy to do, and you don't have to, you know, put dye all over it and wash the dye off and stuff like that. So anyway, I also want to say, if the time lapse makes it look super easy to make this piece, it is a little bit tricky and a little bit frustrating, and it did take me a little while to make that to be the exact curve, because you've got two ways it's curving. It's not only curving this way, but it's also curving inward, as well as it has a subtle twist to it. The cowl is not perfectly at the same angle here as it is here. It's changing. So that's finicky. So don't think that I just whip that out in like 2 minutes. I'm gonna go ahead and cut out the other side. Then I will cut out the hood, and we'll scribe the hood and dye the hood to put the TIG welded patch in. All right, so I'm gonna go over a couple of the tools I'm gonna use to TIG weld this little piece in. So I like to have my 2-inch angle die grinder here, just in case I need to grind down a little bit of weld and hammer it so that I can adjust the panel as I'm tacking it. If you've ever tacked in a piece and it's tightened up on you, where you run a tack and then you tack it again, and then now right in front of your next tack, it's misaligned because it's pulled itself together, I like to adjust that with a hammer and a dolly. So I've got a hammer and a dolly here as well, and my 2-inch angle die grinder in case, you know, anything happens that needs to be ground off. And typically when I'm welding something in with a TIG welder, I like to fusion tack it first. I like to hold it in, you know, as close as I can, and where I know the metal is touching each other, I'll give it a little fusion tack. That'll hold it in place. And then from there, I gotta make sure that the metal is lined up, you know, each place I'm tacking, but I don't want to tack kind of all over the place, because if, say, for example, I tack it right in the corner and then I tack it right on the edge, but here and here are not perfectly lined up, that actually means that there is more material on one piece to the next. So it will be more difficult to actually line those up as we're tacking along, because they're locked in place by the outside tack. So what I'm trying to say is that I want to start tacking somewhere and just keep tacking from there and just move right along. I don't want to jump all over. That's kind of the way I like to do it with TIG welding, because if it does tighten up on you, then you can just hit it with the hammer with a dolly on the backside and it'll spread it back out again. And the reason it's doing that, of course, is because it's shrinking from the heat of the tack. As we're welding, things are shrinking, and that's just the nature of it. So that's also why people hammer their welds afterwards. That's hammer welding, right? We're gonna weld this all the way up, and the reason why I like to have access to the backside if I'm using a TIG welder is because then I can use a dolly on the backside and I can hammer directly on the weld after I'm finished welding to bring the shape back out. That's also why we would like to be extremely consistent with our fit, is so that our heat is very consistent as we weld it. And then as we hammer, when we're done the weld, our hammering can be quite consistent. We're not gonna have to chase low spots or high spots. It's all gonna be relatively the same amount of hammering all the way along. Consistency is key. That's what, like with TIG welding, consistency is key. My machine is set up at, I believe 55 amps, and I've got 040 TIG welding wire here. Before I bought this, I used to just use my MIG wire. I'd just run out a little bit of 035 out of my big MIG and just straighten it out, and that's what I would use as filler. Typically, you're not adding filler like dab, 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 dab the whole way along, because you don't need to. You're only adding as much filler as you need. So when I'm welding this, I'm going to be welding, and if I see the puddle drop a little bit, then I'll add a little bit of filler. I'm not trying to create a proud bead all the way along. You're just trying to fuse the two metals together without giving it too much extra material. And that's also because the more material you put into it, the more heat has to go into it to melt that material into it. So if we can be, you know, fusion most of the way, but adding a few dabs here and there to the puddle, that's ideal. Oh, and I'm using a 1/16 tungsten. Sometimes I just run my fingernail across to make sure that they're lined up perfectly. Here's my tight spot right there. I'm gonna give that a dab. Nice small little fusion tack there. And it barely heats up the metal at all. Like I can just touch it right away. You'll see I don't really advocate for not wearing gloves, but I really need to feel my fit ups. So I don't wear gloves. If you watched the last video on making this piece and we're trying to fit it to the bead, this is exactly why. It's because I knew I was going to TIG weld it all in, and I just want it to be as tight as possible with the least amount of messing around. So I'm really happy with how the lines came out here. So we've got a little bit of high and low right in this spot. I can feel we're not going to be able to get that out just by manipulating it with our hands. So I think this I can just hammer and dolly just a tiny bit there. It's really nothing. The next spot that's touching perfect is just the top of that bead. So I can feel this is just a little low. It'd be nice to get that corner up. So I've got my hammer and dolly in the back there. think we got it. Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. This is good right till here. So throw a tack right there. See, this is very tight now. Since a couple of tacks, it's been tightening up a little bit. So right now I can't move this up and down because this is high and this is low. So I'm gonna hit this tack right here with the hammer and the dolly. You wanna be right on the dolly so that you're stretching that tack. There we go. Doesn't take much. So now we're good right till there. Oh, I felt it move a little bit. I don't know if, oh no, we're still okay. Still okay. I probably have to hit this one now a little bit. It's sucked in. Yep, perfect. So next spot right here. I'm holding the TIG torch there for the post-flow gas. It's helping cool it down so that this is staying nice and cool. I've got, I think, 3.5 seconds on the post-flow. You could probably go a little bit more even. Okay, so this kind of dives in a little bit, so I'm just going to dolly that up. Okay, this is still diving a little bit, so I'm just gonna line them up. You know, once there's a tack here, it became easier to hit that with it not springing back. Now these are lined up nice. All right, this is nice at the bottom here as well. But slightly gapped apart. See the difference? Well, you might not be able to see, but when metal is super tight together, you can fuse tack them and they will bridge over. But if you have a bit of a gap, they don't want to fusion tack. So that's part of the reason why we want as tight of a fit up as possible. All right, now with TIG welding especially, I want to have tacks every ½ inch or so. And the reason being is because when I TIG weld, I will TIG weld the whole thing in one go. I will not jump around. I will just do the whole thing in one go. And that is also because I want to have a consistent amount of heat in it. I want our consistent fit, and a consistent amount of heat, and a consistent amount of hammering, and it should be back to normal. So what I'll do now is I'll just tack every ½ inch or so. I'm gonna put gloves on now because I don't need to feel anything. Okay, so I didn't actually use any filler other than just that bottom one. Now that they're tacked every 1/2 inch, we can go ahead and weld it. Basically what I'm looking for is just that I can weld from one way, like one end to another, as smooth as possible. So if it means that I need to have a rest for my hand, or if it means that I have to move the piece around to be comfortable so that I can make that, you know, steadily in one full go, that's what I like to do. So I'm just gonna get comfortable and then we're gonna weld that. Actually, before we go ahead and weld it, this is the time where you want to check to see if anything has moved. So right now we could go and if any of these tacks were proud, like I had to add some, like just this bottom one, we could take that down with the 2-inch angle die grinder, and then we can just lightly tap along the seam to make sure that the 2 pieces of metal are matched perfectly when we weld it. This is all, you know, kind of important at this stage, because once it's welded, it's going to be harder to get back, and you'll risk stretching it out if it's not lined up very well. Also, since this bead isn't perfectly aligned, I can hit that with a T-dolly right now and get it a little bit better. So I've just got this cheap T-dolly. Just stick it in there and see if we can get this lined up really nice. Beautiful. Away we go. We're gonna weld that up now. I'm actually gonna give myself a little bit more juice. Rule of thumb for TIG welding for me is approximately 1 amp per thousandths of an inch. Somebody told me that, and I feel like it's a pretty good starting point. If you're doing a 1/8 material, you might want 120 thou. If you're doing 16 gauge, you might want 65 amps, that sort of thing. So I'm gonna see if I can rest here. Yeah, that should feel pretty good. Just prop the hood up with a paper towel roll. So I'm just gonna go from one end to the other and only add filler if I see that it needs it. I'm only adding a dab every 3/4 of an inch or so. Just pushing the puddle along. Right when you get to the end of something, right at the end of the weld, it does get all of a sudden much hotter. So always stop a little bit short or throttle down a little bit. You got really good penetration on that, the whole thing. Now I'm gonna go ahead and go down. Uh-oh, guess you guys didn't even see that. Whoops. So adding in a little bit of filler at the top cut. 1 dab in the bead, 2 dabs in the bead. Again, filler every 3/4 of an inch or so, moving along steady. Right to the end, I'm throttling down, and that's it. Okay, we did pretty good. It's definitely sunken in a little bit right here. So it's got a bit of a kind of a V happening right in there. That's because of the shrink. It's really not that bad here, but what we're gonna do, weld the other side of course, and then we'll knock any of the excess material off here with some 80 grit, and then we'll go ahead and hammer this. All right, so just a little 2-inch angle die grinder. Not really trying to touch the base material at all. I'm just trying to knock the tips off, just so there's no, extra material that gets smashed into the metal, creating too much stretch. Just cleaned up the backside a little bit. There really wasn't anything there. So right now, because this is V'd kind of inward, I'm going to hit it from the backside out against a flat dolly. This is gonna help stretch it out. So it'll be a lot easier if I flip this over. Okay, so I'm just butting the edge of this up to this line here. Because it's V'd in, the center of the weld is what's proud. So we're just trying to hit it flat and stretch the weld out a little bit. Looking good. So now I'm going to use the T-dolly on the back side of the bead. That was a little bit warped as well. Might flip this over. All right, I flipped it over again just to get a little bit of this out. This is a low spot coming in. Now that we've flipped it over, this is a high spot. And I've got my flat side of a dolly here and a little bit higher crown of a hammer to make sure that I'm hitting in the right spot. And what I'm trying to do is just pop this out a little bit. So I'm going to put my dolly edge right on the other outside edge. We're going to hit this out. Having a higher crowned hammer is going to help stretch it as well. Yeah, it's already looking really good. Okay, just flipped it back over. Feels really good. We've got a little bit of material that we can grind off now that it's proud a little bit instead of sunken in. So I'm just going to grind the rest of the weld now that it's nice and flat. I think it'll go right down to the base. Okay, looking good. Here's a little tip with the discs. I always buy 3-inch discs and I cut them down to the 2-inch size, and I'll leave a little bit extra so you can keep cutting them down, because I only ever really wear the edge. You know, the center never wears as fast as the edge, so just wanted a fresh edge to cut this body line here. Now that it's been cut off with the 80 grit roll lock, I just go to 80 grit on the DA. And if I really want to get fancy, little Scotch-Brite. We could go further. You could pick and file and make that absolutely metal finished, but I'm gonna stop right there. I think it looks awesome. All right, so that is what we are left with. I'm pretty happy with it. I did gouge a little bit in there, see a little cut, but it is looking flat, it is looking straight. I'm super stoked. So the difference is, we're gonna go over that now that we're gonna get into the MIG welding side here, but keynotes on TIG welding: tight fit up. You wanna work from one side to the next when you're tacking. You want your tacks to be every ½ inch or so apart. You wanna full weld it, be as consistent as possible. My settings on the welder were about 65 amps, full throttle when I went for it. You might want to lower that if you're not going to go as fast. Only add as much filler as you need. That's the other beauty of it, is that, you know, we barely had to grind it, and it is a nice full penetration weld. So TIG welding is the closest thing to gas welding, which was kind of, you know, the best stuff they did back in the day. So TIG welding is nice when you can TIG weld. The reason why we are MIG welding this, and we certainly could TIG weld it, I actually could get a spoon back here and probably hammer some stuff out if I needed to, but mainly I'm just trying to show you the differences. So in here, it would be very difficult to get in behind there to do any grinding or anything that we would need to do so that we could start hammering. So we are going to control the distortion as best we can, and one of the first ways we did that was by making our patch in a certain way. That's why I built the flange onto here, and we're putting the weld in the trough, just so that the two cut lines are not super close together. This gives us a nice new edge as well. Our flange here is going to be nice and strong because it's near this broken edge. So those are the first few things that we're going to do to make sure that we don't warp the crap out of this. And much the same as TIG welding, we are going to start tacking from one end to the next. In this case, I'll probably start tacking up top here and watching this edge for gap and consistency. You know, this is backed a little bit by another piece of sheet metal, so this is not quite as important. So I'll be focusing on fitting this edge perfectly for a nice weld. And I'm sure this edge will be equally as nice, but this side is more important to me. So anyway, we're going to start tacking from one end to the next. Similar to TIG welding, it's the exact same really, but I want to make sure that we're not putting too much heat in here. One way you can do that is by setting your welder up to be as hot as possible so that your tack is as short as possible. I know that doesn't make sense, but I will crank my welder all the way up, and I usually use about 70, like 7 out of 10 on the wire speed and full throttle. If you have a forward position welder like mine, this is just a Memco 130. So the beautiful thing, like I said, about tacking hot is that you can just tack super fast, and there's no time for the heat from your tack to soak in. You don't have to burn as much material because it's going to burn hotter, quicker, faster, deeper. So yeah, we're going to start tacking this piece in now and get her welded up. All right, so we got both sides put in, just tacked every inch and a bit. Concentrating on this side. This is the side that means the most to me because it's body, outer metal. You know, this, I mean, they both ended up with very tight gaps, but this is what, you know, I'm focusing on. And just like TIG welding, as we tack, it is pulling it in. So when I'm doing a place where I can't get to the backside to smash a tack to kind of widen it out, especially if it's this strip, what I was doing is I was fighting it a little bit as I was tacking it. I would line it up while I'm fighting it a bit, and then when you tack it, you can actually feel it, you know, try to shrink, but you're fighting it so it won't shrink, right? And that way I didn't have to stretch any of the tacks back out, and we were able to get a really nice tight gap the whole way. So yeah, I mean, much the same as TIG welding. How to install these, you're just working from one end to the other, trying to keep these two planes as flat as possible. That's kind of the main objective. We're gonna try and keep this cool as we're tacking it now. So we're gonna do very hot, quick tacks to start welding this up, but we're gonna sort of hop around a little bit, somewhat methodically. I like to stack attack, stack attack, stack attack, and cool in between each tack. That way the metal stays cool to the touch, and you're not adding heat and building heat and causing more warpage than there needs to be. So that's kind of my trick as far as welding with MIG on sheet metal, is that I want to tack it hot and quick and fast, and then cool it right away. And that way it's a good tack, it's solid, it goes deep, but it gets cooled right away, so you're not adding too much heat into it, and you're controlling the distortion really well. So we're gonna, you know, this is what takes a long time. So we're gonna be tack, 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 going all the way around. And you'll see when we're done, once we're finished grinding, how little distortion there really is when you use that technique. Okay, we did pretty good. Got everything welded up. So like I said, stack attack technique. We're just stacking tacks one on top of each other until we've stitched it all the way down. We didn't get any oil canning, kept it cool. You know, a split second after you've got your tack done, you just come in with the air, cool it off, keeps the heat. But you can see the heat lines are very narrow. you know, they're not that fat. I did stitch a little bit here just because it's a nice flat spot. What I'm gonna do to grind this stuff is I use 80 grit on a roll lock, and I've got multiple roll locks. This one is a really tiny one I've ground down just to fit in here. So the sweet thing about these roll locks, these Cubitron ones, is that I just buy 3-inch ones. I'll cut them down, I'll use them on a 2-inch, and then those ones you can even cut them down and use them on a 1-inch because you never end up wearing the middle. So anyway, that's what I do for that. So I'll go 80 grit on the angle die grinder. We'll clean as much of this off as possible. I just want to note that if you're grinding this down and you hit one side before the other side, don't just keep grinding. Like, you know, if it's extremely close, then sure, but the idea is to stop when you hit the base material because you don't want to grind any further than you can. You couldn't paint or Bondo over that anyway, so if you see the one edge of the weld on one side and it's smooth on the other side, that's just what it is. That's okay. It's really not that big of a deal. So it's way better to leave it than to grind too far and make your metal weak. So yeah, that's it. I'm going to 80 grit it, and then as always, I'll probably use the DA with the 80 grit palm sander afterwards, and that's it. You know, there's going to be a little bit of a low in here, I can feel like, but it's barely anything. That's better than having a high spot. So because this weld did shrink, you know, there's a tiny bit of a low, but it's almost nothing. I'm going to show you guys with a ruler afterwards that there is a tiny low, and that's okay. All right, so there it is. The finished body line goes right into the cowl. It is looking good. We filled this in, this little spot. Our bead is gone here. We've got, MIG welding on the cowl in those spots where I couldn't have access to in the backside. Works great. Control your heat, control your distortion. Be consistent. Same thing up here with TIG welding, but just a little bit different process. I do love TIG welding anytime where I can get to the backside because I can make sure that everything's nice and smooth afterwards. All in all, that's it. I mean, really happy with the progress on this car. Stoked that we've got a hood on it now. It actually looks like something. And let me know what you think. Let me know what you think of that bead. Let me know what you think about the techniques. If you got anything to add, like I say, this is just the way I do it. This is not the way that, it's not set in stone that you have to do it the way I do it, but those are the reasons why I choose TIG or why I choose MIG, depending on what I am using. I'm not just one or the other. I just kind of do whatever feels right, whatever works the best for me at the time. Yeah, there it is. There it is. I know the video's another really long one, so thanks for sticking with me. I know some guys like the long content, some people don't. I feel like it just gives you the full scope. If you want to click through a little bit, go for it. But for the people that enjoy the longer content with all the details, that's what we're here to do. So thanks a lot for watching Make It Custom, everybody. I'm Carl Fisher, and I really appreciate you guys. Comments, the love, the likes, the shares. It's been overwhelmingly positive, and we really appreciate all the feedback that we get, whether it's good or bad, because at the end of the day, this is all to help you guys. This channel's for you guys, and in turn, by you guys watching it, it's what keeps us alive. If you're looking for another way to help support the channel, you can take a look at memberships. What that means is that you get a little badge by your name when you're commenting. I get to be able to search that badge. I search the badge to make sure that those guys are getting their comments answered right away. But for the most part, I answer all the comments that come under the videos when they're fresh. If it's a video that's really old, I might not see those, but I can search the badge if you were to comment on an old one. The other thing it does, it gives you a discount code for our website that you can use. So if you were gonna buy a t-shirt, I mean, it almost pays you for the monthly fee of $5 just by buying a t-shirt, and you get that discount. Anyway, thanks a lot once again. And don't forget to like, click subscribe, and click notifications. We'll catch you on the next one. Cheers, everybody. Bye-bye.